Hello, everybody. All right, we're going to talk now about the first 100 pages of Slaughterhouse Five, the last novel that we're reading in this class. I thought this would be kind of I was going to say fun, which isn't really the right word to describe this novel, but it's definitely an easier read than the previous two novels we've read in terms of like syntax and structure compared to Beloved and Blood Meridian. This is the first novel that we are reading that deals explicitly with war. In fact, we hear the narrator in that first chapter say explicitly that this is, he's asked if it's going to be an anti-war novel, and he says yes. So just like with Beloved, again, I'm not like a Vonnegut expert. I'm not an expert on this book specifically. I do know Vonnegut is one of he's lumped in with the group of writers that are known for part of a movement called postmodernism, which is probably a word that you've heard. And I don't want to get too deep into the weeds about like what postmodernism is. But one of the things that it does do frequently is it has this kind of self-referential nature, and we see that in the opening narrative. Again, it's meta, right? Where it's referencing sort of what it's doing, and it should be noted that Vonnegut. So this is a book about the bombing of Dresden, which is a city in Germany during World War II. Vonnegut was there and lived through that experience. So while the narrator isn't explicitly Vonnegut, or like, I don't know, you can kind of go back and forth. Vonnegut himself did actually go through that. So yeah, we get the first 100 pages were introduced again to the narrator. That first section with the narrator is actually really interesting and compelling, and it kind of lays out some of the themes of the book. And I just want to draw our attention to a few of them. So this is on page 20 and 21 if you're using, this edition of the book, which is the Random House paperback, the Dial Press Trade, one of their imprints. I don't know. Anyway, it's in the section where he's talking about a book on the Children's Crusade, and this book is actually, it's subtitled Slaughterhouse Five or The Children's Crusade, A Duty Dance with Death. So the Children's Crusade was a historical thing that happened where all of these children are basically shipped off to the Middle East thinking like they'll go on this crusade. And he talks about that, and he's reading this book, the narrator in the beginning, and the book kind of lays out the passage he quotes, anyway, this is on page 20, sort of one of the themes that I think is important to keep in mind. So history in her solemn page informs us that the Crusaders were but ignorant and savage men, that their motives were those of bigotry unmitigated, and that their pathway was one of blood and tears. Romance, on the other hand, dilates upon their piety and heroism, and portrays in her most glowing and impassioned hues their virtue and magnanimity, the imperishable honor they acquired for themselves, and the great services they rendered to Christianity. So he's talking about the historical Crusades, but he introduces this theme of, so he contrasts history, tells us that these people were violent savages who were motivated by bigotry, basically. And then he talks about romance or romanticism, which is this sort of kind of heightened reality. It's dramatic, it's, very heroic, and it extols the men and the people that went over there as like these heroes. It still happens today, right? One of the things, and that's one of the things that Vonnegut is doing, is all of these heroics that get attached to war. Specifically, he's talking about World War II, but this is coming out during Vietnam. He's saying all of these heroics attached to it are just, they ignore what sort of the primary motivations were, and they, it's false, basically, is one of his one of his themes. They ignore the fact that it's just tragic. It's just tragic. And another moment that I wanted to highlight, and this one is sort of effective for me, this is on page 24. There's nothing intelligent to say about a massacre. Everybody's supposed to be dead, to never say anything or want anything ever again. And then, so this book is told in like little sections, right? Which you've probably gathered, which is one of the reasons that reading it actually is kind of an easy thing. Like it goes quick. But the next section, I have told my sons that they are not under any circumstances to take part in massacres, and that the news of massacres of enemies is not to fill them with satisfaction or glee. The next one, I have also told them not to work for companies which make massacre machinery, and to express contempt for people who think we need machinery like that. So it's about as kind of an explicit anti-war statement that you can get. I mean, there's a bunch of them in this book, but I find that one particularly effective, especially thinking about now. I mean, again, Vonnegut, who again was there, he was a prisoner, he survived the bombing of Dresden, but this idea of sort of heroes and villains, to him, it's a moot point. Like a massacre is a massacre, and it's not something that should be celebrated. And he even critiques, there's an anti-capitalism critique. In a lot of ways, an anti-war critique is kind of always going to be an anti-capitalism critique, or maybe not always, but like in my mind, because he says that I told my sons also that they are not to work or support anybody that thinks that we should profit or make weapons that contribute to massacres, right? So he kind of lays it all out there. So anyway, that's the opening. And then we're introduced to the story itself, right? Which is about Billy Pilgrim, who is an optometrist, or he later becomes an optometrist in the war. He is the assistant chaplain. He hangs out with this guy in these first 100 pages. He goes by the name of Roland Weary. I think it's kind of funny, like Weary and Pilgrim. Get it? Anyway, Roland Weary is like a warmonger. We don't like the guy. He gets gangrene in his feet. He ends up dying, and he blames his death on Billy. That's the kind of the last thing that we read. So that's nice. Billy is from Ilium, New York, which is a fictional. Okay, it's fictional. Ilium's not a real. Speaking of, if you didn't notice, this novel also has some pretty explicit sci-fi elements, which I think is interesting, coming off of the heels of reading Beloved, which was tapping into these sort of horror genre tropes to kind of tell this really personal story, sort of as a way into dealing with this trauma. And here we see Vonnegut's kind of doing the same thing. Billy Pilgrim later claims that he was abducted by aliens, the Tralfamadorians. I don't know. But he claims that they're abducted, and they're the ones that say, so it goes, which is a phrase that's repeated over and over and over. And it's what they say about dead people, so it goes, like, yeah, whatever. There's a kind of black humor to this that I'm sure you've picked up on, that Vonnegut is known for. But he's using these science fiction things as kind of a way, a metaphorical representation of kind of the PTSD that Billy Pilgrim is going to come out of this with, and whether or not it's real or not, the novel will kind of go on. But one of the things that I always like to point out is Vonnegut started as a pulp science fiction writer. He was publishing stories in like these pulpy magazines. One of my favorite novels of his is called The Sirens of Titan, which is just a straight up science fiction tale. So anyway, he's very engaged with the genre of science fiction, and we see that play out. We also see this, like in Beloved, there's a kind of temporality displacement going on, right? Billy Pilgrim becomes unstuck in time, and he jumps back and forth between various time periods. So we have a lot of that going on. But as far as story, what we have in these first 100 pages is he's in the war, Battle of the Bulge, they're wandering around, they get captured by some Germans, and they're put on a train. And so that's basically, again, we get flashbacks or flash forwards into the future where we learn about how he's an optometrist and how he claimed that he was abducted by these aliens. And all this stuff. That'll sort of play out. The theme of Christianity in these first 100 pages is not too heavy, but it's going to become much more pronounced as we sort of go forward. I don't know if you noticed the epigraph. Similar to Beloved, it's another one that's related to spirituality. The cattle are lowing, the baby awakes, but the little Lord Jesus, no crying he makes. Right? We all recognize that, the lyrics of that song. All right, so anyway, that's, I could say more, but just start rambling. So that is the first 100 pages. I hope you guys are enjoying it. I really do like Vonnegut. If you like this book, I highly recommend that you check out just about any of his others. He wrote a bunch. He also, we haven't gotten to it, but he there's some doodles that he puts in his book. I'm not going to show it. It's kind of inappropriate. But anyway, he doodles stuff too, so that's fun. But that's basically the first 100 pages of Slaughterhouse Five. Again, this is the first kind of novel so this class has been about violence, right? This is the first novel that we've talked about that is explicitly dealing with war. So again, it's talking about World War II. It's written during Vietnam. And it's a protest novel. It's saying that war is bad and we should not do it. So on that note, my recommendation for this week is actually a film that is technically an anti-war film, but it's been argued that it's actually not because of how it kind of fetishizes actually the actual combat. And anyway, the film is Apocalypse Now, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, written by John Milius. Okay. If you care, John Milius and Coppola. Coppola is one of the sort of great American directors. He did the Godfather films. Apocalypse Now, you've probably heard of if you haven't seen of. You've definitely sort of seen movies rip this off. It's an amazing film. It's very powerful. It is an anti-war film, but again, you can easily make the argument that perhaps Coppola kind of fetishizes war almost too much. This is the film that gives you the very famous scene of the helicopters flying in with the Ride of the Valkyrie going off, But anyway, if you haven't seen Apocalypse Now, which is about the Vietnam War, it's incredible piece of sort of American cinema, very important. If you're vibing with Vonnegut's anti-war, anti-establishment slant here, then definitely check out Apocalypse Now. It doesn't have the humor that Vonnegut's book does, but it definitely has the war is bad message. So, and it messes people up. So that is that for next week. Just keep going through the book, reading the next 100 pages, and I will see you then.